Okay, well, welcome to the Business Growth Factor, where we have conversations about building better businesses. I'm here with Lyndon Smith, and I myself am Josh Leyenhorst. And what are we talking about today, Lyndon?
Yeah, so today's episode, thanks for the introduction. Today's episode is around goal setting, and we're going to dig into a couple of we're going to specifically dig into the OKR framework, and the value behind it. So,
Quick
should we
question.
just, yeah.
How would you define a goal? Maybe just when we talk about goal settings, and put you on the spot here, but um, yeah, how would we define a goal?
You are putting me on the spot here. Yes, it's a target, right? So I think the easiest way to explain this, if you don't have a target, imagine like a dartboard, for example, and you know where the bullseye is. Imagine that's your goal. If you don't have that goal, if your team don't have that goal, and your dartboard's aimed in that direction, and everybody's aiming in the complete opposite direction, you kind of want to have that goal in front of everyone so that they know what they're aiming towards, right? And I think it's really just how do I say it? It's creating clarity on what the objective is for the business, for the team, for everyone. And I mean, why do we put goals in place? It's really to gain clarity and focus on the items or the objectives or the tasks, activities that you should be focusing on to be able to achieve the goal. It's think about a game of soccer, right, or football. I think probably a better term. I don't know. You guys use.
Yeah. In North America, we call it soccer, I suppose, but
Yeah. So you've got goals, right, on either side of the field, and the team know that, like, hey, we've got to make our way to the goal and get the ball through the goals
right.
to score, right? And that's kind of having that goal in place. Gives you some direction on how to achieve or how to get there, right?
That's awesome. Thanks, Lyndon.
Going backwards.
What's that?
Otherwise, you might be going backwards.
Yeah, right. Well, I think it's good to define that because I think sometimes when people get into business, they hear these terms that get kicked around, no pun intended with the whole soccer thing, but they hear these terms that kind of float around and they're like, well, what does that mean for business? Right. And so I think that's a good analogy, even with the soccer idea of what a goal is. Like, really, your goal is to get that ball in that net. And so, because sometimes I think even people start to get in the habit of going through motions in their business where it's like, oh, I just kick the ball towards the net. It's like, no, actually, like, yes, that's your target. Yes, you want to kick it towards the net, but your goal is actually to get it into the net. So if they have a really good like net keeper or goalie, whatever they call it in like South Africa, what's that?
A goalie.
A
Yeah.
goalie. Okay, so we're working on with the same language here. If they have a really good goalie, like then it becomes like, okay, well, how do we get it around him? It's not just kicking it in a direction, because I think sometimes, people set up a business, they start going through motions, there starts to be routine and rhythm, but it might not even necessarily be the most effective rhythm for their business because maybe they're just kicking it at the goalie and not necessarily in an effective way to get it around. Anyways,
Yeah.
we're getting like way down into these analogies, but I just thought it'd be
I really
helpful to
love that.
talk about.
Yeah, I really love that, and I think the other part that occurred to me while you're talking about that is you got a team, right, and you got to leverage the team to achieve those goals. And if the
Right.
whole team knows what the objective is, what the goal is, they can work collectively together. They can collaborate and pass the ball to one another,
Yeah.
and score a goal. Get past that goalie and score a goal. So reach
Great.
those objectives. So yeah. I wonder, speaking about goals, when you're setting goals for a business, should we dive straight into that?
Yeah. Well, why don't we? Let's talk about our first point here. Sort of, in terms of setting goals. Do you go like really ambitious? Do you sort of set the bar low just to get a guaranteed win? Like, what are your thoughts on that?
You never set the bar low. Yeah.
Thanks for clarifying.
You always you always want to stretch yourself, stretch your team, and you want to progress. And if you're setting the bar low, you're never going to progress, and you're never really going to truly find out what your team are capable of. But when setting those goals, you want to be you want to use that SMART framework. It's a pretty common framework for goal setting. So specific, you want to make sure that the goal is specific. measurable, achievable, relevant. So is it relevant to our business, growing or excelling, and time bound. So a lot of the times, we can set a goal, but if you think about the analogy of soccer again, like you've got, I think it was 90 minutes per game, that you've got an opportunity to get like score in the goals. So there's time attached to that.
Right.
Business, we tend to like just set like something in place, and we like we'll get it done. We're working towards that goal. But if you set the time for, like every quarter, you set new goals, and the objective is to achieve that goal within the next quarter, then everybody's in tune with that goal.
Right.
So
In the exit planning framework, like in the SEPA framework, we kind of call them 90-day sprints. So you sort of have these quarters where you focus on specific goals, and it's like a 90-day sprint where you hit those few things, and then you either continue, building off of that, or move on to some new ones.
and it could be, I mean, different contexts. If you're doing some weekly goal setting with your team, so if this is at a departmental level, or maybe you're a senior manager and you've got like a management layer below you, you can have goals that you set for the week, and you communicate those goals, and you sort of recap and recalibrate at the end of the week, see who met their goals, just kind of getting everybody on the same page. But so you can have weekly goals, yearly goals, whatever that looks like. But the most common thing in business is, let's take a look at those 90-day sprints, or the quarterly planning, and it gives you the opportunity to filter those goals down into the rest of the organization, get everybody up to speed, and like aiming towards the same goal, that same
Right.
topic, right? Yeah.
And I guess maybe just to dive into one more of those letters as well from that SMART acronym there, the achievable one I think is pretty important also, just to unpack a little bit, because I've seen situations where organizations have set unachievable goals for their teams, and it just seems to cause just as disenfranchisement, if that's a word,
Yeah.
with the goal, right? You have these teams who are now no longer, like, they don't perceive it as something that they can even achieve. They're like, well, if we can't do it, what's the point in even shooting towards it, right? And so they just kind of abandon it altogether for something that maybe makes more sense to them. But then also, getting to the earlier question, you set the bar low or you set it high, right? Like, stretch yourself, but so it's achievable, but it's not necessarily a guaranteed win. And I suppose, the guaranteed wins are nice in that they help you be like, okay, we achieved something, we like conquered something that's good. Maybe that can be a step towards that goal. So now you're tracking more of those incremental steps, so you can celebrate each guaranteed win, I suppose, if you want to call it that, getting to that overall, like that higher goal.
Yeah, 100%. There's a good old saying, shoot for the moon and you'll land amongst the
That's
stars.
right. Yeah. I think I
So,
saw that on a calendar once.
aim high, never set the bar low. I don't want to say I disagree with, like setting the bar low.
Yeah.
I understand what you're saying. Make sure that the goals are achievable, absolutely. And you'll only know once you start stretching or stress testing your team, what you can expect out of them. And if they can achieve the goal, you're there to challenge them or support them. Like, hey, how are we tracking with this? Like, where can I help you? What's it going to take to get it done? And
Yeah.
and you're there to sort of quarterback them all the way through, so that the business, it's leveling up every single quarter.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so that kind of gets into the whole idea of like setting ambitious objectives. So, how do you sort of measure the progress then? So you set like a goal, right? You set
Yeah.
your target. How do you measure that?
A great question. And before I get into that, I think there's a bigger thing here that that I want to sort of bring up in terms of goal setting. So as I mentioned, you can do goal setting for like weekly, quarterly, annually, and long term. You always want to take a look at like what the end is, what the end goal for your business is. For example, that BHAG, I think it's Jim Collins that speaks about it in. I think it's the book Good to Great, where he speaks about it the first time.
Yeah.
That big, hairy, audacious goal. So, like, what is it that you're really out to achieve? And then you're breaking those goals up into shorter, bite-sized chunks, and you're progressing towards that BHAG at the end of the day. Now, to go back to the question like that, how do we measure it? How do we actually put like what framework do we use to achieve those goals? So there's a few that we can consider, and I can chat about a bunch of them. But the one that I'd like to focus on specifically today is the OKR framework. You do get like the EOS Big Rocks framework and a bunch of others. They're all kind of the same in a sense, but like a little bit different. So the results pretty similar, and the concept around it is pretty similar as well. So the
So
OKR,
just to
yeah,
hop in, like just to define some terms. So EOS is like the entrepreneurial operating system
correct,
method, and
yeah.
OKRs. What's that stand for listeners?
OKRs is objectives and key results, and there's a book, Measure What Matters by John Doerr. He didn't design the framework, but he speaks about that framework in the book, and he shares a little bit about how Google and other large organizations have successfully implemented this, and how it's contributed to the success that they are today by using that OKR framework.
Okay.
So objectives and key results. I'm going to unpack that a little bit for us, and then just speak around it. Just the values and what it really creates for your team. So the objectives is, think of that as your goal for the quarter. So you're setting a goal for the quarter. And,
Maybe while we're going through this, Lyndon, I wonder if, like, as you talk through it, it might be helpful to use the analogy of, say, like the soccer game, right? So it's like, what's the goal? What are maybe some of the what's the objective? What are some of the key results? Just to tie it into the analogy, so we can track it.
Lovely, yeah. So, I mean, an objective for a soccer team or soccer team might be to win the league. Or, I don't follow soccer too closely, as you could probably hear.
Nor do I.
But it could be to win the league, right? And then the key results would be they've got to win certain games. We've got to have our star players, in top form at certain times. So there's certain key results and metrics that they need to consider and look at. And then if you drill that down, into a lower level, like the actual game day, the objective would be to win the game by, let's say, three points, for example, in order for us to move to the next level. So I think a lot of that would sort of change on the fly, but the overarching goal would be to win the season or win the league, or something along those lines.
Right. Okay. So maybe,
Yeah.
like, yeah, some of those key results or the indicators, and I guess maybe there's a differentiation between like key results or key performance indicators, but it would be like, yeah, have to win a certain number of games, need to have
Mhm.
a certain number of star players. Maybe I'm not sure all the key success drivers of a soccer team, but like, and so okay, so those are some of the key results that need to be in place in order to meet that objective. Is sort of the idea there.
Yeah. Well, they might need to win certain games at certain times,
Okay.
and that get them through to maybe the quarterfinals, the semifinals, and then the finals.
Okay.
Um, Maybe they need to get certain amount of points in order to get to those to those stages. It all depends on how they've structured, I guess, the league or the knockouts or whatever that looks like.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
And again, you could probably hear the the limited knowledge
The
I have.
expertise here.
Yeah. So when we bring that back into like a business, for example, the executive level is where you want it to start. So you get your executive team in a room together, and they start identifying 3 to 5 objectives. You don't really want to go more than that, otherwise you're focusing on too many things, right? And I could probably challenge everybody on the call today and say, write down all the things that you're focused on right now for this next quarter. If you're not doing quarterly planning or those 90-day sprints, you're probably going to list out everything that you're busy with, and you're going to have a list of like 10 or 15 things, and you haven't got time. You haven't sort of narrowed it down to like, we need to be focusing on these 3 to 5 objectives in the next quarter. So you're focusing on everything, but you're also probably finding yourself procrastinating on everything because it's because there's so many things to focus on and you don't know
Right.
what's the top priority. So what
So when
you're
we say
doing.
things that, sorry to interrupt there, Lennon, but when you say things that you're working on, are we talking like delivery of services and products, or are we talking about like the actual, like actually things within the building of the business, or?
A bit of everything, right? It could be like our objective is to increase our revenue to 5 million a year, or it could be to bring on another, increase our workforce by 10%. But when are we doing that? Like, what is the greater overarching objective around that? Like, what is it that we're really looking to achieve here? And when you can get the executive team in a room together and you can define what the priorities of the business are. For example, like we're going to increase our revenue by 15% in the next quarter, and that's going to allow us to bring on and increase our workforce by another 10 or 15%, whatever the goal would be there. It's kind of things that have to happen sequentially, and there's priorities now that are placed on certain components, and then those are objectives. And then when you start unpacking those objectives, well, in order for us to get our revenue to 15% or increase it by 15%, what are the key results that are going to, that we're going to have to achieve in order to achieve that objective? And you can start unpacking that and getting clear on those details. So to increase our revenue, and we had this conversation a couple of episodes back, you want to increase your leads by a certain number, right? Or you want to make sure that you're tracking your leads so that we got to increase leads by 30% because our conversion rate is only this amount, and we're going to bring on so many customers, and that's going to help us bring our revenue up to the level that we want. So understanding all those metrics and having that in place, like I said, based on the earlier episode that we have, you're able to actually set proper goals or objectives. Yeah.
And I like that those are very specific and very measurable. So we got the part of SMART going on there. So that's good.
Mm-hmm. Achievable, I guess, yeah, and relevant. I mean,
Very
and
relevant. Yeah.
really the relevance is also setting the priorities, right? So if you understand what the priorities are, it might be something that's relevant this quarter, but not next quarter, or it might not be relevant this quarter. It might only be relevant once we've got these other mechanisms in place, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's kind of talking about measuring how things are going as far as the goals go.
Yeah.
I guess once you have, say, your objectives in place, and then you have a list of key results, and so what you're saying based on this framework, at least the OKR framework, is you're kind of looking at 3 to 5 key results that you should be focused on for that objective.
Yeah.
Can those key results then become objectives for, say, another department or another person in the company?
Absolutely, yeah, and that's the whole the whole structure around it is you get your executive level setting out their objectives and their key results. Those key results then inform the objectives for the next management level, and then they would set up their key results in line with those objectives, which were the key results for the executive level, right?
Right.
And then you kind of sort of start filtering or drilling that down into the rest of the organization. So
So theoretically, then the key results of all the different departments should all feed up towards the overall objectives of the company that way.
absolutely, and what that creates is alignment. You don't have a department working excellently at whatever they're doing, but there's no alignment in terms of like the rest of the business. So
Right.
what you want to do is break down those silos. Everybody's still working towards their objectives for their departments, but it all kind of ties in together with the main objectives of the organization. So it creates. I got a couple of notes here. It creates alignment. So it gets everybody in the business aligned, not just everybody on your team, but everybody in the business aligned. Creates transparency and like this is what we're working towards. Gets everybody focused on the right things. So we're talking about that list of maybe like 10 or 15 things that you might be working on. Our focus needs to be on this because that's what it ties in with our OKRs, our objectives and key results. And then measurability. So by having those key results in place, you can also start setting or tying in KPIs for your team members that are actually out there performing and executing the work. And you can have those KPIs for like each division as well.
Right. Okay. And then I guess it allows for sort of a quick check in then too. If you're to check in with each department and be like, hey, these are your key results that we're looking at. Are you on track with that, right? Are you sort of like red level, orange level, green level in terms of,
Yeah.
if you wanted to dashboard that out, get a little bit nerdy in Excel or whatever, right? You can have some color coding anyways to see like, okay, what are the areas that we actually need to focus on to move this forward? If there's any that are maybe falling behind or staying on track or whatever it might be.
Yeah, love that, and we love getting nerdy, Josh. That's what we
That's what
do.
we do here. Yeah, that's right.
I think the other part of it is, when you're executing or implementing OKRs in a company, um, you want to get it clear at the executive level first, but then when you start rolling it out into the rest of the business and the rest of the organization, you want to be so clear on why you're doing this with your team. So what value does it have for their department? Now you're breaking down these silos, and there's a whole lot of transparency. Like, what value does that create for the different departments in the company, for the individuals themselves that now have to spend and invest some time in actually creating key results to tie in with those objectives, right?
And so
So
you're saying some of those key results are driven at that level, like in each department. So it's not necessarily like a top down push. It's more like, hey, here's some of your objectives. You develop your key results
absolutely, yeah,
department. And so then there's maybe a bit more ownership that each department will have when it comes to those key results.
yeah. You hit the nail on the head there. So when they're doing it themselves, if you're just giving them like, here's our vision, or this is the objective, this is what what the goal is,
Yeah.
uh, you figure out how to get there, and that's what you're paying them for, right? They
That's why you hire good people, right? They're the ones who are competent to figure that out.
Yeah, there's a whole lot of books that I just sort of jogged through my head now, like Who Not How, Good to Great. There's a
Yeah,
you
yeah.
know, but it's those people that are going to set their own key results to ensure that they're hitting those objectives. And all
Right.
you're doing as a business owner, or the executive team or leadership in the company, is how do we support you or challenge you to make sure that we hit these objectives.
Awesome. Okay, so in terms of like implementation and sort of best practices, Lyndon, like have you kind of seen some good ways to implement this, or maybe it's recommended in the book, or what are some thoughts there?
I think the immediate thing that comes to mind in terms of implementation is just get clear on your purpose, right? Clear on the vision, the why. Like, go to the start with why. Simon Sinek, start with why, and communicate that with the team. So what is the value again that they're getting out of it? We're getting alignment, transparency, focus, and measurability out of having this framework in place. Everybody's working on the right thing and not just something, and
Right.
we're driving the business to to be successful. So there's an impact that they have in the greater scheme of things, rather than just coming to work and like, this is what we're doing, and not really knowing why we're doing it, but we're just working
Right.
here. But we're now, when you have these clear goals and a vision, like, this is what we're going to be doing, this is the impact that it's going to have. People are like, yeah, I can get behind that. I can support that. And you start creating that culture where people are now contributing, and you said it earlier, just taking ownership of what they're creating, because like, we know what we're out to achieve, and we're responsible, we're accountable for that result at the end of the day.
Right. When you
Yeah.
when you said doing the right things, it just reminded me of an interesting way of somebody. I forget where I read this, but they're just talking about you can do the right things and you can do things the right way, right? And so the right things are like that's being effective, and then doing it the right way is being efficient. So you want to make sure both of those are happening at the same time.
100%.
But yeah, so basically you want to get buy-in, so you want people to see the overall benefit of doing it. I think the fact that people are involved in generating their own key results that feed into the objectives is pretty key
Yeah.
in getting that buy-in too. So
I think it's also important to have someone who's actually facilitating it. So someone
mm,
in your leadership structure who's facilitating it. And what I mean by facilitating it is saying, like, all right, making sure that the guys have got enough training and understanding and education around OKRs, so that when they're developing their key results, and they're taking ownership of it, that they truly understand the framework, right?
Right.
It's not an overly complex framework, but when you start to implement it in the business, it starts becoming a little bit tricky for some
Sure.
people to wrap their heads around. Oh, this is going to tie in with that, and like, just
Right.
focus on where you are, and smashing that objective that has been allocated to your department, division, or team.
Right. So
Yeah.
a quarterback who can kind of take care of that part.
Absolutely, yeah, and then also just making sure that like, hey, these guys are setting some key results. Are they really in line? Because maybe the leadership structure, at a management level, you want to make sure that it's all sort of tying into the up the chain to the greater objectives of the company.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
And so this whole framework is described in the book, Measure What Matters from John Dewar, correct?
Yep.
Okay.
There-
Awesome. So
There's a
that's a place somebody can go to learn more about that as well.
Yeah, and if you're more of a visual learner, there's a website, whatmatters.com. They've
Okay.
got a couple of training videos on there that you could jump into.
Oh,
Uh,
awesome. Okay.
Probably take you a couple of hours just to rip through that and get clear. Well, I don't even think it'll be an hour actually. And then just watch those videos. You can understand the framework and just learn how to implement that in either your team or in your business. I mean, we're talking about this at an organizational level, but I mean, if the person watching this is a manager or someone within a company, there's nothing stopping you from setting OKRs for your team,
Right.
getting that, and then sort of starting to push that up into the rest of the organization, right?
It's a great idea. Yeah. So it's not
Yeah.
like you necessarily have to have a whole company buying into the process. You can just adopt it as a framework for your own department. That's a really good
Yeah.
call. I like that.
Absolutely. We look at it from a organization level, because that's always, you want to sort of
Of
break
course.
down
Yeah.
silos. But I mean, if you wanted to implement that in your team, and just break down those silos in your team and create that alignment, transparency, focus, and measurability, you
Yeah.
can do that inside your own team. And then, when people are like, "Oh, wow, you guys are doing so well," you can start rolling that OKR framework out into the rest of the business as well.
It's a great idea. Be the
Yeah,
change you want to be, right?
absolutely.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
All right, Lyndon, I think that kind of takes us to about the half hour mark here. Any takeaways at all from this? Or
Yeah, I think a few things just to consider. If you don't know where you're going, or you don't know where the destination is, how do you know how to get there? And this is
right.
really what goal setting is all about. I think you've used the analogy before with Google Maps and dynamic forecasting. If you know where the destination is, and you can communicate that to your team, they can sort of figure out how to get there. And they are your who's, and they can figure out how to get there. And if you're implementing this framework, you can take that into consideration. Let them own their sort of OKR, goal setting. Just make sure that they're clear on what that destination looks like.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah.
I think my takeaway is just talking about this a little bit more with clients. I think it's a pretty good framework to consider as far as goal setting goes. It's not overly complicated. I think, getting back to what we were talking about at the beginning, I think when people think about goals and goal setting in the context of business, sometimes it could be this real ethereal thing that's just like up in the sky. People don't really know what the next steps are, but there's a framework, right? You can just simply set some objectives, identify 3 to 5 key results that would like get you to that objective, and then those are the things that you focus on. That becomes your 90-day sprint. Nice and
Yeah.
simple. I like it.
And that's it. You want to keep it simple.
Yeah.
And the simpler it is, the easier it is for the entire team to get behind it and get on board.
Yeah.
I think there's so many of these frameworks that are overly complex, and people just lose interest because it's like, I have no idea what's going on here.
Yeah.
And to then get everybody on board with that, it's yeah, no, this is too complex. We're not going to follow it.
Yeah. Right. And then it just flops, right? Or sometimes it becomes too complex, because there's companies that'll spend a day or two days going through like a mission and vision, strategy session, and then it ends up maybe on the wall or ends up in a binder somewhere or on the shared drive. But nobody really uses it to move the company forward. And so, yeah, good and simple and actionable. I like it.
Yeah, and I think there's also consistency that needs to be considered here. So once you've done your 90-day sprint or your quarterly planning, at the end of the quarter, do a recap. Do investigate, like, what do we do well, what do we not do well, what objectives did we achieve, did we smash all of them, or are there a couple that we need to kind of recalibrate and bring
Right.
those objectives into the next quarter. So you're reflecting on what what the previous quarter looked like, and you're using that information together with those priorities, that BHAG, and then, like, the steps that you're going to take to get there, and all those things that you kind of got mapped out there. You're reprioritizing. Did I say that right? I think so.
Yeah, yeah, that works.
Prioritizing every quarter, and you're getting the next quarterly plan together, right?
For sure. And then maybe, topic for another time, but like when you're revisiting the goals and how things went, how that's done is super important. I've seen it so often in organizations where it comes a lot of finger pointing, right? Oh, you didn't do this, you didn't get this done, right? But it's that differentiation between people and processes. Quite often, when a target's not met, it was the process. It's not that
Hmm.
people are showing up to work thinking, how am I going to not achieve my targets, right? It's usually something procedural that needs
Yeah.
to be addressed, but we can probably dive into that. That sounds like another episode that we can dive into there. So
We can call that episode "My Team Sucks," and then
yeah,
your team doesn't suck, your systems do.
that's right. Yeah. Excellent, Lyndon.
Yeah.
Well, thanks. That was very insightful and some good actionable steps on this for sure.
Yeah. Awesome. Thanks, Josh. Thanks everybody
Yeah,
for listening. Yeah.
yeah. Thanks everyone for listening, and stay tuned for the next one.